Hi everyone, my name is Jaylin. Today I want to share with you what I learned from reading 100 books in 2023. So last year I read a lot of books in Korean, in English, and also in French. I'm fluent in Korean, so it's much faster for me to read in Korean than English. And also I started to read like stories and kids books mostly in French to learn the French language. So it was very interesting, it was a very fun experience. And most the topic that I learned was how to write, how to speak, and how to read, and how to learn. And many things around historical figures and the era, like the Middle Age, what happened at that time, and the philosophies and psychologies and how our brain functions, and especially how the kid's brain work, and what are the cues and signs that we can recognize by looking at their physical traits, like interesting as the length of the fingers between the second and the fourth fingers, and many different things. So I want to share is that when we are reading something that is difficult, so how to read a difficult books. So there are a few things that I noticed that helps. And the first is a QEC, question, evidence, conclusion structure. And the second is reading kids books. And the third is to use multiple books on the same topic to get a better understanding. So I will go one by one. Oh, and actually there's a fourth one, which is to use the index and the front and back of the books and creating the active learning experience. So I will explain one by one. First, QEC. QEC is the method of note-taking, but you could also apply to reading books to understand better and have more active reading experience while reading it. So Q is question, E is evidence, and C is conclusion. So while you're reading it, you can identify what's the question that is trying to be answered in this book, and then you trace the conclusion. So what are the answers for that question, and what are the evidences that are mentioned to support the conclusion in the end. So this type of active learning method works the best if it's not very complicated topic. Let's say it's not a technical topic, but more of a humanity related topics like histories, like philosophies or things like that. So these have a more logical approaches that you can identify. So when you identify the question, you could do underline of that question, and then when you identify the conclusion at the end, then you can mark as dash. And then when you identify the evidences that supported that conclusion, you could mark as a little dots in front of the sentence. So this active looking that helps you to use more of your brain to connect dots and create connections, and identifying the building blocks that you already had in your brain to efficiently form an idea, so that you can understand deeply better, and also you can remember what you read much longer and retain the knowledge as your own. So this is very helpful. And the second is to use index. So the index of the book. First, it's very interesting because I used to read books like when I first approach a book, I just open anywhere in the middle and I start read. Oh, is it interesting? If it interests me, then I would go back one page and then I would read about it. And at some point, I would read everything from back to the front, and then I read again from beginning to the end. So it was kind of my interesting, I don't know why I did that, but I had a habit of doing that. But lately, it changed a bit. So the way I read now, which I feel is very helpful, is to find building blocks as much as possible before you start actually jump into the actual book content. So what I want to know the first is that which year was this book published, and where, and who is the author. So I look at the front or the end of the book, and it tells you the published year and copyright year and so on. But what I'm looking for is the first print. When was the first print? So this copyright was 2002 for this particular book, and the first print was in 1990, and the last published book of this one was a 2009. So I would assume that, so this content was published based on the context, what was happening around 1990, which was the first print of this book. So that's interesting. And then I would go to the first cover, the back of the cover, front cover, and look at the who is the author and in what context, why was this book written by this person. And then I would look at the forward, at the beginning part, they usually say why they wrote this book or what's the circumstances, and you see you get an idea about that. And I go to the end also and see the closing comments about the book, and you could also get some insights. Then I would look at the index and see, is there anything that interests me, that pops into my eyes? Well, okay. So here, for example, it says what if our fingers were not 10, the number of fingers? If we were 9, how would the number system, those units, would have been developed too, right? So those things are very interesting. So in such cases, I could also go to that page 21 here and then look at what could that be and what my answer would be. So in my mind, instead of a 10th units, probably people will start using 9 as a unit, right? So those things I will just go and read and confirm or see what they said in the book. So in this process, you are building another building blocks that could interest you and keep you motivated to find out what could be the answer for this question, and creating a bigger picture of overall concept rather than just passively reading from the beginning to the end and say, I read it, but I don't understand what I just read, or I don't remember what I just read, right? So that's the second tip that I give you. And the third one is kids books. So especially when the topic seems very difficult or you've never seen that, it's really, really helpful if you start reading kids books. And kids books usually has a lot of pictures, and it tells you a story. So the really interesting thing about story is that it uses the timeline and also a spatial cues. So from what I read from a book called The Reader Come Home, it's written by Marianne Wolf in 2019, and she is the director of UCLA Center of Dyslexia, Diverse Learners, and Social Justice. So she has a lot of insight about how we read as a human being. So she actually had this example of comparing digital books and the paper books. So when people are reading a paper books, they actually remember better, especially the novels. So that is nonfiction books, and they have better understanding of chronological orders, and they were much more efficient in recalling and understanding and getting a bigger picture of a story they read. So it was very interesting. So therefore, it applies to reading kids' books too. So when I read kids' books, for example, for learning French, practicing French, I had this blockage of, okay, I've heard enough, I could understand a bit, but my speech, the ability to speak was stagnated. I was not able to get over a certain level. I was always using the same vocabulary. I was always using the same simple expressions that doesn't have a precise word to describe things or verb to describe the action, but I was always using this shows something, faire, do something, and something like that. That was very limited. When I started reading in French for kids' books, without having to memorize any of the new vocabularies, I was naturally just learning and remembering, and the context of how the word and sentence was used by just reading storybooks. So for example, I was reading books about Mozart and Anne Frank, Martin Luther King, and from those books I learned over 50 words and expressions that I didn't even really try to memorize I never wrote it down anywhere. I never tried to do flashcards to memorize those words, but I just naturally it just set in my brain. So only thing that I did was just to confirm. It's not to memorize it. This is important point that I also learned from learning how to learn. When you are taking notes about what you learned, taking notes itself is the action to there are two, I'm sorry, I'm gonna go back, and there are two circumstances that you take notes, but one is not important, one is actually harmful, and two is conducive for your memorization and a deeper understanding, having connections and so on. So one is that, which is not helpful, is writing notes to remember. So during the class you write down so that you don't forget, or you don't understand, so you just write down for now. Those actions are not actually useful. It's not helpful for your brain. It's because you're just telling your brain, hey, don't worry about understanding or remembering this word because I wrote it down here. You can just look at it later. So that action just tells your brain, okay, delete. It's not important for now. So what you need to try to do is to really just understand the context, just get immersed in the story so you follow through. And then in the end, if you want to confirm what you learned is, or what you remember is correct, you take notes, you write down. I have an app that I built, and I wrote in there the French words that I learned today, and I was writing down, okay, this word, and it was over 50 words in that week alone by reading a couple of books in French. So it was crazy. So that's another tip that I give you. And the last one is to read multiple books on the same topic. So it's the same thing that I learned something about the Middle Age. In Middle Age, there is this role. So chevalier is it's a knight, right? So in the armor, in the silver color, and then they go to the battle and they are given rewards by the lord, the landlord, with the tower they can live in, and with their family, and then they have servants and so on, and what they eat, and what they how they sleep, and how they manage their lands and so on. And from learning that, I got a better understanding about the era itself. But then I still had some questions about other things. So I've picked up another kid's book that told a story about the chevalier itself. So what is this person, and then how you can become one. And I picked up another book that talked about the Middle Age itself, so the era. So why were the lords always having battles? And I got to finally have a better picture about the terminologies that they used, even the weapons they used. Lance, they call it, the long spear. And the sword they used is called épée in French. So these things just naturally I learned, interestingly. So anyway, these are the tips that I gave you today on how to read the difficult books. So to recap, use the active learning through QEC, question, evidence, conclusion structure, and use the index and front and back of the book and the published year and the author information that is written in the book to build the building blocks and start to initiate questions and interest and generate motivations to read this book further by having this initial questions being generated through this exercise. And the third is to read kids' books. If you find this topic is new or difficult, you could start by reading kids' books that had stories and pictures, and that can help you the spatial temporal connection and overall memorization and deeper understanding of the topic, and get interested in the topic even more. And then the last one is to read multiple books in the same topic, so that you can have a spaced repetition of the same word they use or same concept, terminology that you didn't understand being explained in another book in another context, so they could also give you a better understanding and opportunity to kind of repeat being exposed to the same information again. So these are simple tips that I gave you today, and hopefully you enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to see how you thought about this video. You can leave your comments down below. Thank you very much. I'll talk to you later. Bye.